Welcome. Tonight we are exploring the 5,000-year history of boxing, from the Roman gladiators who wore iron spikes on their knuckles, to the British champion who invented leather gloves stuffed with horsehair to protect his aristocratic students. This is the story of a brutal human impulse forced into the shape of a science, where raw violence gradually surrendered to geometry and timed rounds. If you find peace in these histories, please like, subscribe, or leave a thought below. Now settle in, soften your shoulders, slow your breathing. Let's begin. The year is 2000 BCE, in the city of Eshnunna. The city of Eshnunna sits in the Diyala River Valley, and this specific valley exists in the center of modern Iraq. The Diyala River Basin covers an area of roughly 12,000 square miles. The river flows for 275 miles from the Zagros Mountains down to the Tigris River, and the moving water carries fine sediment along its path. The riverbanks contain thick deposits of alluvial clay. A Sumerian artisan gathers this wet clay from the riverbank to create a flat, rectangular tablet. The wet clay consists primarily of aluminum silicate and trapped water. The fine grain size of the aluminum silicate allows the artisan to carve highly detailed lines measuring only a few millimeters in width. The surface of the clay holds a temperature of roughly 70 degrees Fahrenheit in the open air. The artisan kneads the mud to push out trapped air bubbles before shaping the flat rectangular block. The artisan holds a stylus made from a cut river reed. The reed originates from the Arundo donax plant, and this specific tall grass grows thickly along the muddy banks of the Diyala River. The artisan cuts a section of the hollow stem using a bronze blade, slicing the tip of the stem at an oblique angle. The outer edge of the reed possesses a high concentration of silica. The silica gives the plant fiber a sharp, rigid edge capable of cutting cleanly into the dense clay. The artisan holds this wooden tool between the thumb and the index finger. The artisan presses this wooden tip directly into the soft clay, and the physical pressure displaces the mud. This action forms indented lines and curves on the flat surface. The physical pressure transferred from the hand through the reed carves the exact shapes of two fighting men. The carved men stand and face each other. Both men hold their arms bent at a 90-degree angle, and both men keep their fingers curled tightly inward to form clenched fists. The physical indentations in the wet clay form the earliest documented visual record of boxing in human history. The artisan cuts deep lines into the facial areas of the figures, representing heavy, thick beards extending down to their chests. The men wear short tunics woven from sheep wool. The fabric covers the torso and ends precisely at the upper thigh, allowing for a full range of leg movement during physical combat. The artisan adds raised bands of clay around the wrists of both figures, depicting strips of animal hide. The leather bands wrapped around the wrists originate from cattle hide. The workers soak the skins in water containing dissolved plant tannins, and the tannins bind to the collagen proteins in the hide. This chemical process transforms the raw skin into durable leather. The fighters cut the cured leather into long, narrow strips, measuring roughly 1 inch in width, wrapping this leather tightly around their carpal joints. The leather provides rigid anatomical support to the bones of the hand, compressing the skin and restricting the movement of the radiocarpal joint. The compression aligns the bones of the wrist with the bones of the forearm. The human hand consists of exactly 27 individual bones, and these 27 pieces make up roughly 13% of the total skeletal structure in a human body. The base of the hand holds 8 carpal bones, and the middle section contains 5 metacarpal bones. The fingers contain 14 phalange bones. The leather wrappings hold all 27 bones together in a compacted shape. The artisan carves the men in the exact moment before the forward motion of an arm drives those fragile carpal bones into the solid bone of an opponent. The arm motion depicted on the tablet requires a specific sequence of muscle contractions. The deltoid muscle in the shoulder contracts to lift the upper arm, and the triceps muscle on the back of the arm contracts to extend the elbow. The flexor muscles in the forearm contract to pull the fingers into a tight ball against the palm. This exact positioning locks the joints of the hand in place. A human fist traveling through the air carries kinetic energy. The wrapped knuckles strike the mandible bone of a human jaw, and the impact transfers the kinetic energy through the skin directly into the skeletal structure. The tightly bound leather absorbs a fraction of this force, stopping the metacarpal bones from bending backward upon impact. The Sumerian fighters rely on these animal skins to stop structural fractures in their hands. The artisan finishes carving the two figures and places the clay tablet in the direct path of the sun. The solar radiation evaporates the water trapped inside the silicate minerals, and the clay hardens into solid terracotta over a period of several days. The solid structure preserves the physical stance of the two fighters. The creation of this terracotta relief happens roughly 2,072 years before Roman builders begin laying the foundation for the Colosseum in 72 CE. The residents of Eshnunna bury this tablet in a local tomb, and the soil presses against the dried clay for thousands of years. Archaeologists eventually dig into the dirt of the Diyala River Valley to uncover the terracotta fragment. The practice of carving fighting men into clay spreads southward down the river systems of Mesopotamia. The rivers connect Eshnunna to other settlements in the region, including the city of Larsa, located further south along the plains. The distance between Eshnunna and Larsa measures roughly 150 miles. 800 years pass, bringing the date to 1200 BCE. The inhabitants of a nearby site, called Sincara, gather mud from the riverbanks and use reed tools to cut shapes into wet clay, documenting fighters who add a hollow wooden cylinder covered in stretched animal skin to their matches. The year is 1200 BCE in the ancient city of Larsa. Larsa sits in the southern region of modern Iraq. The specific archaeological site bears the modern name Sincara. A mud brick tomb in Sincara holds a small clay tablet. The tablet measures exactly 3 inches in height and 4 inches in width. The small size allows a single human hand to hold the solid object. The clay surface displays the carved images of 2 fighting men. The carved men wear flat caps woven from animal fibers. The caps cover the crowns of their heads and end exactly at the ears. Short tunics drop from their shoulders and end at the upper thighs. The men stand with their arms raised and their hands formed into tightly closed fists. The artisan carves the wrists, showing only the raw skin and muscle. The exposed carpal and metacarpal bones press directly against the inner layers of the skin. The fighters use these exposed knuckles to strike the soft tissues of an opponent. A direct strike from a bare fist transfers mechanical force directly into the muscle fibers and blood vessels of the target area. The blunt trauma ruptures the capillaries beneath the skin, releasing liquid blood into the surrounding tissue to form a dark hematoma. The act of throwing a heavy punch requires a massive expenditure of cellular energy. The human heart beats at an accelerated rate to supply oxygen to the contracting muscles. The left ventricle of the heart pumps roughly 5 liters of blood per minute during periods of rest. This volume increases to 20 liters per minute during the physical exertion of combat. The blood travels through the arterial network to deliver oxygen molecules to the deltoid and triceps muscles. The carved scene on the tablet includes a third figure standing directly next to the two fighters. The third figure holds a large percussion instrument. The instrument consists of a hollow wooden cylinder covered by a stretched piece of animal hide. The musician tightens the hide using cords made from twisted sheep intestines. The tight membrane vibrates at a specific frequency when the musician strikes it with a wooden stick. The strike produces a sharp, low-frequency sound wave. The sound wave travels through the air at roughly 760 miles per hour. The acoustic energy enters the ear canals of the fighters and pushes against their tympanic membranes. The tympanic membrane connects to three small bones in the middle ear, called the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. The stapes bone pushes against the fluid in the cochlea, sending electrical signals through the auditory nerve to the brain. The fighters synchronize the physical movements of their feet with the rhythmic intervals of the drum beats. The motor cortex in the human brain directs the leg muscles to step in exact time with the percussive noise. The men shift their body weight from the left foot to the right foot in a steady, measured pattern. The rhythmic footwork allows the fighters to maintain balance while throwing heavy strikes. The physical exertion generates internal body heat. The blood vessels in the face and torso expand, pushing warm blood close to the surface of the skin. The air temperature in southern Iraq frequently reaches 110 degrees Fahrenheit during the summer months. The fighters secrete a mixture of water and sodium chloride from their eccrine glands to cool the skin. The inhabitants of Lhasa place this completed clay tablet inside a burial chamber. The tomb consists of baked mud bricks, stacked to form a rectangular enclosure. The builders seal the chamber with heavy clay blocks. The sealed environment traps a specific volume of stagnant air and maintains a stable humidity level. The dirt covering the tomb holds a consistent temperature of roughly 65 degrees Fahrenheit below the surface line. This stable underground environment preserves the structural integrity of the dried clay for 3,200 years. Human hands pack similar objects and trade goods into woven baskets, moving outward from the Tigris and Euphrates river valleys. The carved images of men fighting with closed fists travel along established trade routes toward the Mediterranean Sea. The trade routes follow the Euphrates River northward, before turning south along the Levantine coast. Caravans of domesticated camels transport these goods across the sand dunes. The camel hooves press into the loose quartz sand of the Sinai Desert, carrying the culture of fist-fighting westward. The physical distance between southern Iraq and the Nile River Valley measures exactly 850 miles. The year 1350 BCE approaches in the Egyptian city of Thebes. Artists in Thebes gather their bronze chisels to carve the images of bare-knuckle fighters directly into the limestone walls of a pharaoh's tomb. The year is 1350 BCE in the ancient Egyptian city of Thebes. Thebes sits on the eastern bank of the Nile River, roughly 400 miles south of the Mediterranean Sea. The physical location borders the edge of the modern Valley of the Kings. Limestone cliffs rise sharply from the desert floor. These cliffs contain layers of calcium carbonate formed from ancient marine beds. The ambient air temperature near these cliffs reaches 104 degrees Fahrenheit during the afternoon. Workers use bronze chisels to cut directly into this solid limestone, excavating a massive burial chamber for an Egyptian official named Keruef. Keruef holds the official title of steward to the principal wife of the pharaoh Amenhotep III. The workers carve flat, recessed panels into the stone walls of the tomb. The artisans use mallets carved from heavy acacia wood to strike the copper alloy chisels. Each physical strike of the mallet removes roughly 3 millimeters of solid stone. The carving process releases fine limestone dust into the surrounding air, carrying the dry, alkaline smell of crushed chalk. The workers create a permanent visual record of a specific religious festival honoring the deity Amun. The events occur during the 30-year jubilee of the pharaoh, known as the Sed Festival. The carved panels span 12 feet across the western wall of the courtyard. The artisans rub carbon black and red ochre pigments into the carved indentations to create visual contrast. The visual relief depicts 3 separate pairs of men engaging in physical combat. 6 individual fighters stand on a flat surface of packed clay and dirt. The men wear simple loincloths woven from raw flax plant fibers. The weavers extract the long bast fibers from the stems of the Lignum usitatissimum plant after soaking them in the waters of the Nile. The woven linen wraps tightly around the waists of the fighters, leaving the entire upper torso and the legs completely uncovered. The direct sunlight strikes the exposed skin of their shoulders and backs. The fighters close their hands to form tight, bare fists. The men tuck the thumb bone over the index and middle fingers to lock the phalange joints in place. The combatants strike at each other, using the exposed carpal and metacarpal bones of their knuckles. One specific carving shows a fighter extending both arms forward at the exact same time. The fighter delivers 2 simultaneous punches toward the facial structure of his opponent. The defending fighter raises his right arm and turns his ulnar bone outward to intercept the dual strike. The radius and ulnar bones in the human forearm possess a high density of cortical bone tissue. This dense calcium structure allows the forearm to absorb blunt trauma from an incoming strike without fracturing. The physical impact of the block creates a sharp, percussive sound as raw skin slaps directly against raw skin. The attacking fighter aims his strikes strictly at the frontal and parietal bones of the skull. The adult human cranium requires roughly 500 pounds of mechanical force to fracture under direct impact. The fighters generate this kinetic energy by pushing off the packed dirt with the metatarsal bones in their feet. The fighters rotate their pelvic bones, transferring the mechanical momentum up the spinal column. The force travels through the latissimus dorsi and deltoid muscles, down the humerus bone, and directly into the bare knuckles. The bare knuckle strikes leave physical contusions on the facial tissue. The blood vessels burst under the epidermis, pooling dark red blood in the soft tissue surrounding the eye sockets. The fighters secrete sweat from their eccrine glands, depositing a liquid mixture of water, urea, and sodium chloride onto the dry dirt. The evaporation of this liquid removes thermal heat directly from the surface of their skin. A carved group of men stands closely around the fighters. These figures form the earliest documented audience for a specific combat sport in the historical record. The spectators keep their eyes focused strictly on the physical exchange of blows. The audience members wear long pleated linen kilts, distinguishing their specific social rank from the active fighters. The pharaoh Amenhotep III sits on a raised wooden throne located exactly 2 feet above the packed dirt. Artisans cover the wooden throne with hammered gold leaf. The gold originates from mines in the southern region of Nubia, and metalworkers hammer the gold into flat sheets measuring exactly 0.1 millimeters in thickness. The spectators and the pharaoh watch the bare-knuckle combat as a literal offering of physical endurance to the deity Amun. The artisans finish carving the limestone walls and the workers seal the tomb of Keruef with heavy stone blocks. The limestone walls enclose the silent carvings in total darkness. The dry desert air inside the sealed chamber maintains a low relative humidity of roughly 20%. This arid environment preserves the precise lines of the blocking forearm and the clenched fists for over 3,000 years. While the Egyptian workers seal this specific tomb, ships constructed from cedar wood cross the Mediterranean Sea. The sea water holds a high salt concentration of 35 parts per thousand, leaving white sodium chloride deposits on the wooden hulls of the ships. The boats sail northwest from the Egyptian coast toward the Aegean Sea. The prevailing winds push the cedar ships across a distance of exactly 600 miles. The ships arrive at the volcanic island of Thera. The timeline moves to the year 1500 BCE, marking a distinct period of artistic production on this island. Painters on Thera gather red and blue mineral pigments to decorate the flat plaster walls of a wealthy settlement called Akrotiri. The year is 1500 BCE, on the island of Thera. Thera sits in the southern region of the Aegean Sea. The island forms a circular landmass located exactly 75 miles north of the island of Crete. This geographical position places Thera squarely within the maritime trade routes of the Minoan civilization. A coastal settlement named Akrotiri rests on the southern edge of the island. Workers in Akrotiri construct multi-story houses using cut volcanic rock and heavy wooden support beams. The masons cover the rough interior walls of these houses with two separate layers of wet lime plaster. The base layer, called the orichio, contains coarse sand and plant fibers for structural grip. The top layer, called the intonaco, consists of pure calcium hydroxide mixed with fine water. The wet mixture holds a high alkaline level and feels smooth and cold to the touch. A Minoan painter stands inside a room in a building designated by archaeologists as Beta. The square room measures exactly 9 feet by 10 feet. The painter applies mineral pigments directly onto the wet lime plaster of the intonaco layer. The wet plaster absorbs the water suspended in the pigment. A chemical reaction occurs as the calcium hydroxide absorbs carbon dioxide from the ambient air inside the room. The chemical process produces solid calcium carbonate, trapping the pigment particles permanently inside the crystalline structure of the wall. The painter grinds raw iron oxide to create a deep red ochre paste. The painter grinds calcium copper silicate to mix a bright blue pigment. The painter uses the red iron oxide to outline the bodies of two young boys facing each other. The physical proportions of the painted figures align with human children measuring roughly 7 to 8 years in age. The boys stand on a flat horizontal line of painted ground. The boy on the left wears a blue cap painted with the calcium copper silicate. A long lock of dark hair falls from the cap down to his shoulders. The boy wears large circular earrings painted with yellow ochre. The yellow pigment replicates the visual appearance of solid gold. Necklaces of blue stones encircle his neck, and matching blue bracelets wrap tightly around his wrists and ankles. The boy on the right displays bare earlobes and exposed wrists. Both boys hold their arms raised in front of their torsos. The boy on the left extends his right arm forward in a straight linear path toward the face of the right boy. This physical motion replicates the strict mechanics of a modern right cross punch. The boy pivots his right foot inward, rotating his pelvic bone. The rotation transfers the mechanical weight of his body from the rear leg to the front leg. The kinetic energy travels up the spinal column and through the shoulder joint. The fist travels directly toward the zygomatic bone and the maxilla of his opponent. Both boys wear a distinct piece of equipment on their right hands. A thick layer of painted material covers the knuckles and the back of the right hand. This painted material forms the earliest historical evidence of protective boxing equipment. The left hands of both boys display only exposed skin. The padding on the right hand consists of compressed animal wool wrapped in soft animal leather. The leather fastens tightly around the wrist with a securing strap, compressing the radiocarpal joint. The padded material fundamentally alters the physics of the punch. A bare fist striking a hard human skull concentrates the total kinetic energy into a surface area of roughly 2 square inches. This tight concentration generates an extreme level of localized pressure. The pressure bends and fractures the small metacarpal bones inside the hand. The compressed wool in the glove expands the striking surface area to roughly 6 square inches. The soft material compresses upon impact with the target. The compression slows the deceleration of the fist by several milliseconds. The extended deceleration time and the larger surface area reduce the total mechanical pressure applied to both the hand and the face. The padding preserves the structural integrity of the hand bones. The boys practice this combat technique in the warm Mediterranean climate. The air blowing off the Aegean Sea carries small aerosolized droplets of salt water. The salt lands on the skin of the inhabitants and leaves white residue on the walls of the buildings. The island of Thera sits directly over a volatile section of the Earth crust. The African tectonic plate subducts beneath the Eurasian tectonic plate at a rate of roughly 1.5 inches per year. The friction generates massive pockets of liquid magma deep underground, reaching temperatures of roughly 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The pressure in the magma chamber eventually exceeds the structural weight of the overlying rock. The volcano erupts, expelling superheated gas and fragmented rock directly into the stratosphere. The eruption column reaches 20 miles into the sky. The ambient temperature drops rapidly as the dense ash cloud blocks the solar radiation. White pumice falls continuously onto the settlement of Akrotiri. The pumice stones measure up to 3 inches in diameter. The stones pile up in the streets and crush the wooden roofs of the houses under their combined weight. The pumice accumulation reaches a depth of 20 feet. A secondary flow of fine volcanic ash sweeps across the settlement. The ash seals the buildings in a dense, airtight layer. The physical weight of the ash presses firmly against the plastered walls in room beta. The airtight seal displaces all oxygen from the immediate environment. The displacement of oxygen starves aerobic bacteria, halting their cellular reproduction. The dry ash maintains a rigid environment, holding the calcium carbonate matrix of the plaster perfectly intact. The dark, oxygen-deprived space preserves the red iron oxide and the calcium copper silicate pigments in their exact original chemical states. The bright red skin of the boxing boys remains chemically stable under the volcanic rock. The sharp smell of sulfur dioxide from the eruption eventually dissipates into the upper atmosphere. Odorless white pumice stone rests against the boxing fresco for exactly 3,500 years. The sea water from the Aegean rushes into the empty magma chamber, collapsing the center of the island into a deep, watery caldera. Sailors navigate wooden ships over this submerged crater in the following centuries. The ships measure roughly 50 feet in length and feature large square sails woven from heavy linen. The prevailing winds push the ships northeast across the Aegean Sea. The vessels carry bronze weapons and clay pottery toward a narrow strait of water called the Hellespont. The Hellespont connects the Aegean Sea to the Sea of Marmara. A wide coastal plain sits beside the southern entrance to this waterway. The timeline advances to the year 1180 BCE on this dusty plain in western Anatolia. Greek warriors push their bronze spears into the dry dirt and establish a large military camp to hold athletic games for a fallen soldier. The year is 1180 BCE on the coastal plains of Troy. Troy sits along the northwestern coast of modern Turkey, bordering the entrance to the Dardanelles Strait. The salt water of the Dardanelles flows from the Sea of Marmara into the Aegean Sea at a continuous surface speed of roughly 1.5 knots. Hundreds of wooden Greek warships rest on the flat beach, pulled up onto the sand above the high tide line. The flat plain leading up to the city of Troy consists of dry, packed dirt containing high levels of quartz and feldspar. The ambient temperature on this plain reaches roughly 90 degrees Fahrenheit during the summer afternoon. A Greek military commander named Achilles stands on this dirt plain. Achilles hosts a physical athletic competition to honor Patroclus, a dead soldier from the Greek army. The Greek soldiers pile cut oak and pine wood to form a large funeral pyre. The burning wood reaches temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The fire consumes the body of Patroclus and releases thick black smoke containing carbon particles into the air. The smell of burning pine sap and charred bone drifts across the military camp. Achilles announces a specific physical contest involving hand-to-hand combat. Achilles brings 2 distinct physical prizes into the center of the viewing area. The first prize consists of a living, 6-year-old mule. The mule stands exactly 56 inches tall at the shoulder, possessing thick muscle tissue in its hind legs. The 6-year-old animal possesses the specific anatomical strength required to pull heavy wooden plows through hard clay soil. Achilles designates this strong working mule as the prize for the winner of the contest. The second prize consists of a solid bronze cup. Artisans pour molten copper and tin into a clay mold to form the round vessel. The metal cup features 2 handles attached to the sides with thick copper rivets. The solid bronze weighs roughly 3 pounds and feels cold to the human hand. Achilles assigns this 2-handled cup as the compensation for the losing fighter. A tall Greek soldier named Epeius stands up to claim the mule. Epeius possesses broad clavicle bones and thick layers of dense muscle mass across his shoulders. Epeius steps into the center of the fighting circle. A second soldier, named Euryalus, steps forward to accept the physical challenge. Euryalus wears a heavy bronze belt wrapped around his waist to support his lumbar spine. The soldiers hand both men long strips of cured ox hide. Greek tanners create this leather by soaking the raw skin of an adult ox in river water and scraping the subcutaneous fat from the dermis layer with a sharp stone. The ox hide strips measure roughly 2 inches in width and feature clean, straight edges cut with a bronze knife. Epeius wraps the cured ox hide around his knuckles, the back of his hands, and his wrists. The collagen fibers inside the leather possess a high tensile strength. Epeius pulls the strips tight, compressing the soft tissue against his metacarpal bones. The tight leather restricts the blood flow in his superficial veins and binds the 27 bones of the hand into a single, rigid mass. The straps firmly secure the radiocarpal joint, aligning the bones of the wrist directly with the ulnar and radius bones in the forearm. Euryalus wraps his hands using the exact same method. Both men step toward each other, On the dry quartz soil, the coarse dirt crunches under the soles of their bare feet. Euryalus shifts his weight and lifts his arms to initiate an attack. The human eye takes roughly 200 milliseconds to process visual information and send the signal to the brain. Epeius observes the mechanical movement of his opponent and reacts within this fraction of a second. Epeius steps forward with his left foot and rotates his pelvic bone, transferring his body weight entirely to his front leg. This physical rotation generates severe kinetic energy. The energy travels up through his spinal column and into his shoulder socket. The triceps muscle on the back of his right arm contracts rapidly, extending his elbow joint. Epeius drives his leather-wrapped fist directly into the right cheek of Euryalus. The rigid leather impacts the mandible bone of Euryalus at a high velocity. The sharp edge of the ox hide cuts cleanly through the epidermal layer of the cheek, releasing bright red blood from the severed capillaries. The physical force of the strike pushes the mandible bone sharply sideways. This rapid lateral movement applies extreme mechanical torque to the skull. The skull rotates abruptly, while the soft human brain inside remains momentarily stationary due to inertia. The sudden rotational acceleration causes the brain tissue to twist inside the rigid cranial vault. The physical torsion travels directly down to the brainstem. The brainstem controls the autonomic nervous system and basic motor function. The sudden physical stretching of the nerve fibers disrupts the electrical signals traveling to the leg muscles. Euryalus instantly loses all muscular tension in his lower body. His body collapses backward onto the packed dirt, sending a small cloud of dust into the dry air. Euryalus spits dark blood from his mouth as his fellow soldiers drag his limp body by the feet away from the fighting circle. Epeius steps back, retrieves the woven halter, and claims the 6-year-old mule. A Greek poet named Homer records the exact sequence of this physical exchange. Homer dictates the specific details of this event in the 23rd book of a long epic poem called the Iliad. Homer sequences the words using a strict rhythmic meter called dactylic hexameter, consisting of exactly 6 metrical feet per line. Scribes write the Greek words onto sheets of papyrus using black ink made from soot and water. The papyrus pages preserve the earliest literary account of organized boxing in the historical record. The written text specifically details the physical destruction of the human face from a single concentrated blow. The Greek soldiers maintain this exact tradition of honoring dead warriors through physical combat. The practice of fighting for prizes spreads across the Aegean Sea to the mainland of Greece. The settlements on the mainland construct dedicated dirt arenas to host regular athletic competitions. The passage of time advances exactly 492 years forward. The year shifts to 688 BCE. The location moves to a flat stretch of leveled sand in the western Peloponnese region of Greece, an area known as Olympia. An athlete named Onomastos of Smyrna walks onto the hot sand to fight under a formalized code of rules in a large competitive festival. The year is 688 BCE, in the sanctuary of Olympia. Olympia sits in the western Peloponnese region of Greece, situated deeply in the valley of the Alpheos River. The Alpheos River deposits fine alluvial sand and loose soil across the valley floor. Greek workers clear a flat, rectangular area of this dirt to create a distinct fighting surface. The workers dig into the earth to a depth of roughly 3 feet, breaking up the hard clay underneath and mixing it with the loose sand. This process creates a soft, yielding surface designed to absorb the mechanical impact of a falling human body. The workers use heavy wooden rakes to level the soil, removing sharp stones and hard debris to prepare the ground for barefoot athletes. The organizers designate this specific combat area as the scammer, translating directly from Greek to the dug-up place. The direct solar radiation heats the sand, and the ambient air temperature in the open arena frequently reaches roughly 95 degrees Fahrenheit during the summer months. The heat radiates upward from the ground, warming the air just above the sand. The crowd numbers roughly 40,000 people. The spectators sit directly on the sloping, grassy embankments surrounding the dirt arena. The thousands of human bodies release thermal heat and carbon dioxide into the air, while the dry soil smells heavily of trampled grass and human sweat. An athlete named Onomastos travels from the coastal city of Smyrna to compete inside this hot arena. Smyrna rests on the eastern shore of the Aegean Sea, requiring Onomastos to sail roughly 250 miles across the salt water. Onomastos steps onto the leveled dirt of the scammer to compete in the very first official Olympic boxing tournament. The Greek officials record this specific combat event as pygmachia, translating literally to fighting with closed fists. This specific tournament occurs during the 23rd Olympiad. Onomastos authors the official code of rules governing this specific athletic competition. The rules dictate continuous physical combat from the start of the match until its absolute conclusion. The fighters exchange strikes continuously until one man physically collapses into the dirt or signals his total submission. The submitting fighter raises a single index finger directly toward the sky to signal his defeat to the presiding judge. The judge, holding the official title of Hellanodikai, stands closely beside the fighters, holding a long wooden switch cut from a flexible tree branch. The judge strikes the bare skin of a fighter with the wooden switch to physically enforce the rules during the match. The rules written by Onomastos place all adult men into a single open category. Fighters of vastly different physical masses and heights stand together in the center of the arena. The officials place small pieces of clay, called kleroi, into a silver bowl. Each piece of clay bears a specific Greek letter. The athletes draw the clay pieces from the bowl, and the officials match the men who draw the exact same letter. Onomastos possesses a smaller skeletal frame and carries less muscle mass than many of his opponents in the bracket. Onomastos relies on fast, repetitive muscle contractions in his legs to constantly shift his physical position on the loose dirt. The rapid footwork allows his body to slip safely past the heavy, incoming strikes of larger men. A larger man generating immense kinetic energy drives his wrapped fist toward the head of Onomastos. Onomastos pushes off the sand with his metatarsal bones, moving his cranium exactly 3 inches outside the physical trajectory of the punch. The heavy fist travels through the empty air, and the larger fighter expends a high volume of cellular energy without striking a solid target. The continuous missed strikes drain the oxygen reserves in the bloodstream of the larger fighter. Lactic acid accumulates in the muscle tissues of the larger opponent, causing his muscle fibers to contract at a much slower rate. Onomastos waits for this precise biological fatigue before stepping forward to deliver his own rapid strikes. He aims his wrapped knuckles specifically at the soft tissues surrounding the eyes and the rigid structure of the nasal bone. The repeated blunt trauma fractures the thin nasal cartilage of his opponent. The broken cartilage swells rapidly with internal bleeding, forcing the larger opponent to breathe entirely through an open mouth. The restricted oxygen intake further accelerates the physical exhaustion of the larger man. The opponent eventually raises a single index finger toward the sun, and the Hellanodikai halts the combat by stepping directly between the men. Onomastos defeats every opponent in the bracket through this exact method of attrition and speed. The final opponent yields, and Onomastos secures his place as the first Olympic boxing champion in human history. The Olympic officials present Onomastos with a wreath formed from intertwined olive branches. The branches originate from a specific, sacred olive tree growing directly inside the sanctuary of Olympia. The leaves of the Olea europaea tree possess a thick, waxy cuticle designed to retain moisture in the dry Mediterranean climate. Onomastos places the woven ring of waxy green leaves directly onto his head. The physical leaves rest against his hair as the crowd cheers for the victor. The organizers carve the name of Onomastos into the official stone registry of Olympic victors. The registry consists of rigid letters pressed into marble tablets, preserving the sequence of champions for future generations. The rules formulated by Onomastos remain the standard code for Greek pygmachia for hundreds of years. The Greek fighters utilize a specific hand wrapping called the melichai. The melichai consists of raw ox hide softened with animal fat, providing support to the knuckles while leaving the fingers free to clench into a tight fist. Fighters continue to follow his precise framework, wrapping their hands in this cured leather before stepping onto the sand to fight continuously. The timeline advances exactly 288 years forward. The year shifts to 400 BCE. The location moves east from the sanctuary of Olympia to the militaristic city-state of Sparta. Sparta sits in the Eurotas River Valley, bordered by the steep limestone cliffs of the Taygetus mountain range. A Spartan youth sits on a wooden bench inside a training area and begins wrapping new, highly modified leather thongs tightly around his knuckles and forearms, preparing the bones of his hand to inflict deep lacerations upon human skin. The year is 400 BCE in the city-state of Sparta. Sparta sits in the Eurotas River Valley, bordered by the steep limestone cliffs of the Taygetus mountain range. A Spartan youth sits on a wooden bench inside a training enclosure covered in packed dirt. The youth holds a long strip of animal hide in his hands. The Greeks call these specific leather strips himantes. Tanners create the himantes from the skin of an adult cow. The tanners use bronze blades to scrape the fat and hair from the raw hide. The workers soak the remaining dermis layer in a wooden vat filled with water and crushed oak bark. The oak bark contains natural tannins. The tannins bind directly to the collagen proteins inside the skin, converting the raw hide into durable leather. The youth applies raw olive oil to the surface of the leather before using it. The lipid molecules in the olive oil penetrate the porous surface of the cowhide, lubricating the dry collagen fibers. The softened leather strip measures exactly 10 feet in length and 2 inches in width. The youth begins wrapping this 10-foot strip tightly around his left hand. He starts the wrapping process at the wrist, pulling the leather in tight circles around the radiocarpal joint. The youth pulls the strap diagonally across the back of his hand, covering the 5 metacarpal bones. He passes the leather over the knuckles and loops it back down toward the wrist. The physical application of the himantes takes exactly 20 minutes to complete properly. This 20-minute duration equals the exact time required for a marching human to walk 1 Roman mile. The youth pulls the thick leather tight against his skin with each successive loop. The taut leather compresses the epidermis and restricts the flow of blood through the superficial veins of the hand. The reduced flow of oxygenated blood causes the fingertips of the youth to turn a pale blue color. The 10 feet of leather binds the separate carpal and metacarpal bones into a single rigid block. The wrapping process covers the main knuckles and leaves the thumb entirely free to fold inward against the index finger. The youth repeats this exact 20-minute wrapping process on his right hand. The Spartan youth stands up from the wooden bench and steps onto the packed dirt of the training enclosure. He faces a second Spartan fighter wearing the exact same 10 feet of leather around his hands. Both fighters hold their leather-bound fists high in the air, aligning their knuckles directly with their own eyes and cheekbones. The Greek fighters aim their strikes exclusively at the head and neck. The fighters leave their lower bodies and torsos completely exposed to the open air. The ambient temperature in the Eurotas Valley reaches roughly 85 degrees Fahrenheit, and human sweat forms on the bare skin of their shoulders. The Spartan youth pivots on his left foot to initiate a strike. The friction between the sole of his bare foot and the packed dirt provides mechanical traction. The youth pushes against the earth, transferring kinetic energy up through his tibia and femur bones. His pelvic bone rotates forward, pulling the latissimus dorsi muscle in his back. The triceps muscle extends his right arm, driving the leather-wrapped fist through the air at a high velocity. The thick leather of the himantes strikes the forehead of his opponent. The skin above the human eye measures roughly 1 millimeter in thickness. This thin skin rests directly over the hard frontal bone of the skull. The rigid edge of the cowhide acts as an abrasive surface upon impact. The kinetic force pinches the thin skin directly against the solid bone. The shearing pressure cuts cleanly through the epidermal and dermal layers of the eyebrow. The physical laceration severs the supraorbital artery, located directly beneath the skin. The heart of the opponent beats at an elevated rate of 150 beats per minute due to the physical exertion of combat. The high blood pressure forces warm red blood rapidly out of the severed artery. The liquid blood flows down the face and drips directly into the left eye socket of the opponent. The blood coats the cornea, instantly obscuring the vision in that eye. The blinded fighter uses his left hand to wipe the blood from his face, leaving his head exposed to the next incoming strike. The youth drives his left fist forward, striking the side of his opponent's head directly on the ear. The human ear consists of a thin layer of skin covering a framework of elastic cartilage. The blunt force of the leather fist bends the ear rapidly against the skull. The physical trauma shears the perichondrium away from the underlying ear cartilage. The perichondrium layer supplies the blood to the ear. The separation tears the small connecting blood vessels, causing liquid blood and serum to pool in the empty space between the skin and the cartilage. The pooling blood forms a large visible swelling, called a hematoma. The separated cartilage cells lose their supply of oxygen and nutrients. The cartilage tissue dies and folds inward upon itself. The pooled blood calcifies over several weeks, hardening into a dense fibrous mass. This calcification permanently disfigures the outer ear into a crumpled shape known medically as cauliflower ear. The Greek fighters accept these physical deformities as permanent markers of their athletic occupation. The leather himantes continuously cut skin and fracture bones during the long training sessions in the Eurotas Valley. The porous leather absorbs the human sweat and blood, turning the cowhide stiff and dark brown over several weeks of continuous use. The Spartan fighters discard the hardened leather and cut fresh 10-foot strips from new ox hides to continue their physical training. The use of these specific leather thongs spreads outward across the various city-states of Greece. Artisans in these cities observe the physical damage caused by the leather bindings and document the injuries in their artwork. The timeline advances exactly 100 years forward. The year shifts to 300 BCE. The location moves to a hot artisan workshop in the city of Athens, Greece. A Hellenistic sculptor prepares a mold made of wet clay to cast molten bronze into the exact shape of a resting fighter. The year is 300 BCE in the city of Athens, Greece. Athens sits in the central plain of the Attica region, surrounded by 4 large mountain ranges. The central plain of the Attica region measures roughly 1,000 square miles. An artisan workshop operates near the southern base of the Acropolis Hill. The ambient air temperature inside the workshop reaches 110 degrees Fahrenheit. A Hellenistic sculptor stands next to a large cylindrical brick kiln. The kiln burns dry olive wood. The rapid oxidation of the olive wood generates internal temperatures exceeding 1,900 degrees Fahrenheit. At this specific thermal threshold, a solid bronze alloy melts completely into a bright orange liquid. The bronze alloy consists of exactly 90% copper and 10% tin. Miners extract the copper ore from the island of Cyprus. Merchant ships transport the heavy metal across the Aegean Sea to the Athenian foundries. The Aegean Sea contains elevated levels of dissolved sodium chloride, depositing white salt crystals directly onto the wooden hulls of the merchant vessels. The sculptor utilizes a manufacturing technique called lost wax casting to form the metal into a human shape. The artisan builds a full-sized core model using wet clay. The artisan coats this clay core with a layer of beeswax, measuring exactly 3 millimeters in thickness. The sculptor carves the detailed musculature of a human male directly into the soft wax, using a wooden stylus. The artist covers the carved wax with a thick outer shell of liquid plaster and coarse silica sand. The coarse sand provides structural stability to the mold, holding the plaster intact under the intense thermal shock of the molten metal. The kiln heat melts the beeswax, and the liquid wax drains out through small channels cut into the base. The sculptor pours the liquid bronze into the hollow cavity left by the melted wax. The bronze cools over 48 hours, and the copper and tin molecules lock into a solid crystalline structure. The sculptor shatters the outer plaster shell with an iron hammer to reveal the finished figure of a resting fighter. The wall thickness of the finished bronze measures exactly 5 millimeters, creating a completely hollow interior cavity. The life-sized bronze statue stands exactly 4 feet and 2 inches tall while holding a seated position. The sculpted fighter rests his physical body weight on a large cut stone boulder. The torso of the statue leans sharply forward. The rectus abdominis muscles contract slightly to support the heavy upper body against the pull of gravity. The sculptor models the mouth of the statue wide open, exposing the tongue and the remaining teeth inside the jaw. An open mouth allows a human athlete to draw in maximum volumes of atmospheric oxygen following the extreme cardiovascular exertion of hand-to-hand combat. The bronze figure features a thick beard covering the jawline and the chin. The curls of the beard contain deep recesses, and the sculptor uses a fine iron drill to hollow out the center of each individual curl of hair. The head of the bronze fighter turns abruptly over his right shoulder. The thick neck muscles bulge outward, showing the sternocleidomastoid muscle in a state of high physical tension. The artist uses a hardened steel chisel to cut shallow grooves directly into the bronze surface of the face and the right thigh. The sculptor hammers thin, flat strips of pure copper directly into these cut grooves. The pure copper possesses a distinctly reddish physical color compared to the yellowish tint of the bronze alloy. The red copper inlay visually replicates the exact appearance of fresh liquid blood dripping down from open wounds. The copper strips on the thigh measure exactly 3 inches in length, showing the blood falling directly downward according to the pull of gravity. The face of the statue displays deep, physical lacerations on the forehead, both cheeks, and the lower lip. The sculptor also flattens the bridge of the nose, indicating a complete fracture of the underlying nasal bone. The right ear of the bronze figure bulges outward from the skull in a thick, irregular shape. This carved swelling documents a specific medical condition called an auricular hematoma. The blunt force of a human fist separates the outer ear cartilage from the underlying perichondrium tissue. Liquid blood pools into the empty space and calcifies into a permanent hard mass, creating the specific deformity recorded by the sculptor. The hands of the bronze fighter rest heavily on his upper thighs. The hands wear a highly evolved form of Greek boxing equipment called the oxys. The oxys consists of thick animal leather reaching halfway up the human forearm. A layer of sheep fleece lines the inside of the leather to protect the skin of the human wearer from friction burns during combat. The fleece layer absorbs the liquid sweat produced by the eccrine glands of the fighter. The exterior of the oxys features a stiff, raised band of hardened cowhide positioned directly over the main proximal phalanges of the fingers. The hardened cowhide band measures 2 inches in width. Leather workers boil this specific cowhide strip in water to denature the collagen proteins. The boiling process causes the leather to dry into a rigid, inflexible solid. The sculptor models this hardened knuckle band, extending exactly 1 inch above the surface of the hand. This rigid edge acts as a permanent blunt weapon, designed to fracture the zygomatic facial bones of an opponent upon direct mechanical impact. The sculptor carves complex geometric crossing patterns into the forearm straps of the oxys. Leather workers cut these specific securing straps from the soft underbelly of the cow, allowing the material to flex naturally with the mechanical movement of the radiocarpal joint. The heavy bronze statue preserves the exact physical dimensions of the wounds inflicted by these hardened leather weapons. Greek citizens eventually placed this heavy bronze statue in a public Roman bathhouse on the Quirinal Hill to display the physical characteristics of a veteran athlete. The statue weighs roughly 200 pounds and rests entirely on a solid stone base. The use of the hardened oxys spreads westward across the Mediterranean Sea. The timeline advances exactly 280 years forward. The year shifts to 20 BCE. The location moves westward to the Italian peninsula, specifically to the expanding city of Rome. Roman leather workers observe the Greek oxys and begin bolting heavy iron components directly to the hand wrappings. A trained Roman gladiator steps onto the sand of a massive stone amphitheater wearing a new combat device called the cestus. The year is 20 BCE in the city of Rome. Rome sits on the Italian peninsula, built heavily along the banks of the Tiber River. The Tiber River carries dissolved calcium carbonate, depositing the mineral continuously onto the riverbanks over thousands of years. A flat, circular floor rests in the center of the limestone structure. A layer of crushed silica sand covers this floor to a depth of exactly 6 inches. The porous sand absorbs liquid human blood spilled during physical combat, keeping the smooth limestone blocks beneath completely dry and secure for walking. A trained gladiator walks onto this blood-soaked sand wearing a heavy piece of combat equipment called the cestus. The cestus consists of thick cowhide straps bolted directly to solid metal plates. Roman blacksmiths smelt iron ore inside cylindrical clay furnaces reaching internal temperatures of 2,800 degrees Fahrenheit. The blacksmiths hammer the glowing liquid iron into flat rectangular plates, measuring exactly 4 inches in length and 1 inch in width. The smiths drive small iron spikes through the center of these cooling plates. The blacksmiths also melt raw lead to pour into small spherical weights. Lead holds a high density of 11.3 grams per cubic centimeter, adding massive concentrated weight into a very small physical volume. Leather workers bind these spiked iron plates and lead weights directly over the knuckles of the gladiator, using strips of cured pigskin. The metal components add exactly 3 pounds of solid mass to the end of each human arm. The gladiator consumes a specific daily diet called sagina, consisting entirely of boiled barley and mashed beans. This high-carbohydrate diet builds a thick layer of subcutaneous fat across the torso and arms of the fighter. This fat layer measures roughly 1 inch in thickness over the abdominal muscles. The fat acts as a physical cushion, absorbing the kinetic energy of shallow surface lacerations to spare the vital organs and major blood vessels. The gladiator swings his right arm in a wide horizontal arc. The additional 3 pounds of metal increases the total kinetic energy of the thrown punch by roughly 40%. The gladiator drives the iron spikes directly into the deltoid muscle of an opponent. The sharp iron points puncture the epidermis layer and sever the underlying muscle fibers. Red oxygenated blood flows out of the punctured muscle and drips down the arm onto the dry silica sand. The gladiator steps forward, pushing off the packed sand with his metatarsal bones. The gladiator drives a second strike toward the side of his opponent's head. The temporal bone of the human skull measures exactly 4 millimeters in thickness at the Tyrian junction. A direct strike from the spiked iron plate against this temporal bone splinters the thin calcium structure instantly. The iron spikes push the shattered bone fragments inward, lacerating the middle meningeal artery located inside the skull. The severed artery pumps warm liquid blood directly into the enclosed cranial vault. The accumulating blood increases the internal physical pressure against the brain tissue until the brain stem completely stops regulating the heart and lungs. A Roman poet named Virgil observes these specific gladiatorial matches from the limestone seating tiers. Virgil records the mechanical destruction caused by the cestus in a long Latin epic poem called the Aeneid. Virgil writes the Latin text onto papyrus scrolls using a black ink made from iron salts and tannic acids extracted from oak galls. Egyptian workers harvest the Cyperus papyrus plant from the Nile Delta, slice the pith into thin strips, and press the strips together under heavy stones to dry into a flat writing surface. The 5th book of the Aeneid details a physical fight between a young Trojan named Dares and an older Sicilian fighter named Entellus. Virgil dictates the exact physical weight of the cestus worn by Entellus, specifically describing the raw lead and iron sewn directly into the animal hide. The poet describes Entellus swinging his weighted fist downward onto the top of a prize bull to demonstrate the lethal force of his weapons. The heavy iron plates strike the frontal bone of the animal directly between the horns. The frontal bone of an adult bull measures over an inch thick and requires roughly 1,000 pounds of mechanical force to fracture. The iron cestus delivers this exact physical force, shattering the skull and driving sharp bone fragments directly into the bovine brain. The severe physical trauma to the cerebral cortex drops the bull instantly onto the packed dirt. The Roman spectators wager silver denarii coins on the fatal outcomes of these matches. The silver denarius coin weighs exactly 3.9 grams and contains 95% pure elemental silver. The exchange of these silver coins directly monetizes the physical destruction of the human body. The Roman emperors fund these lethal spectacles using tax revenue collected from agricultural provinces in North Africa and Gaul. Roman slaves drag the dead bodies of the losing gladiators off the sand using iron hooks hitched firmly under their armpits. The slaves carry the corpses through a specific arched exit gate named the Porta Libitinensis. Roman architects dedicated this specific gate to the Roman deity of funerals. The public games continue to feature the iron cestus for another 400 years. Roman politicians gradually divide the empire into two distinct administrative territories, separating the military and political power between the East and the West. The timeline advances forward by exactly 413 years. The year reaches 393 CE. The geographical focus shifts east across the Mediterranean Sea to the massive walled city of Constantinople. Constantinople serves as the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, resting on a rocky peninsula separating the Golden Horn estuary from the Sea of Marmara. A Christian emperor named Theodosius I signs a legal document written on stretched animal parchment, outlaws all pagan festivals across the entire empire, and forces the ancient Olympic Games to close their doors indefinitely. The year is 393 CE in the city of Constantinople. Emperor Theodosius I presses a solid bronze seal into a small pool of hot beeswax. The beeswax melts at exactly 144 degrees Fahrenheit. The bronze seal transfers the imperial insignia into the cooling wax, securing a legal edict written on sheepskin parchment. The parchment consists of dried collagen fibers scraped entirely clean of subcutaneous animal fat using sharp iron knives. The edict formally outlaws the Olympic Games and all athletic festivals dedicated to the ancient deities. The Greek administrators at the sanctuary of Olympia receive this physical document and close the athletic competitions on the sand. The administrators halt the practice of pressing the names of boxing champions into the marble registry stones. The unbroken chain of recorded champions halts precisely at this specific date. Greek and Roman athletes abandon the leather hymantes and the heavy metal cestus, the large limestone amphitheaters empty of human occupants. Rainwater carrying dissolved atmospheric carbon dioxide falls onto the travertine stone blocks, slowly dissolving the calcium carbonate matrix over the following centuries. Plant roots from the Ficus carica, the common fig tree, grow directly into the expanding cracks of the stone seating tiers, fracturing the heavy Roman blocks through continuous mechanical pressure. Human populations across the European continent direct their physical labor strictly toward agricultural output. The total population of Europe drops by roughly 20% between the years 400 CE and 600 CE. Outbreaks of the bubonic plague, caused by the Yersinia pestis bacterium, kill millions of human beings. The bacterium travels through the human bloodstream and multiplies inside the lymph nodes, causing the nodes to swell into hard, dark masses, measuring up to 3 inches in diameter. The human survivors of these bacterial outbreaks cultivate wheat, barley, and oats to sustain their necessary caloric intake. A human body requires a minimum of roughly 1,200 kilocalories per day to maintain basic cellular respiration and organ function. Men working the soil in rural agricultural settlements continue to engage in physical combat to settle disputes over grazing boundaries and financial debts. The combat occurs in open dirt fields and inside local taverns built from timber and wattle. Builders create wattle by weaving flexible wooden branches together and covering the lattice with wet clay and animal manure. The dried clay walls emit the sharp, alkaline smell of ammonia when dampened by the rain. The men fighting in these rural spaces step flat on the soles of their leather boots, pushing their physical body weight directly forward into the chests of their opponents. The fighters grasp the coarse wool clothing of their adversaries, pulling the bodies close to deliver short, blunt strikes to the skull. The combat consists entirely of close-quarters grappling and the tearing of soft tissue. The fighters wrap their forearms around the necks of their opponents, compressing the carotid arteries. The physical compression restricts the flow of oxygenated blood to the human brain, causing a total loss of consciousness within roughly 8 seconds. The fighters strike each other using entirely bare knuckles. The exposed carpal bones repeatedly fracture against the dense frontal bones of the skull. The strikes knock the incisor and canine teeth directly out of the maxilla bone, leaving permanent physical gaps in the human jaw. The sharp enamel edges of the broken teeth cut deep lacerations into the soft skin of the knuckles, transferring oral bacteria directly into the open wounds of the attacking fighter. The combatants fight continuously in a single, unbroken period until one man physically collapses onto the ground. The standing fighter delivers blunt kicks and strikes to the fallen body until the opponent physically loses the ability to stand up. Village residents watch these fights and immediately return to their agricultural labor. The outcomes of the brawls exist strictly as spoken accounts among the local workers. The spoken words fade from memory within a single generation, creating a massive historical gap lasting roughly 1,300 years. During these centuries, European metalsmiths focus entirely on forging iron plows, steel swords, and chainmail armor. The iron plows cut directly into the dense clay soils of northern Europe to a depth of 8 inches, allowing farmers to cultivate higher yields of cereal crops. The population slowly recovers and expands over the centuries, creating larger urban centers connected by compacted stone roads. Builders transport heavy oak logs using horse-drawn carts to construct multi-story dwellings in these expanding cities. By the 16th century, the population of London reaches 200,000 residents. The city sits heavily on the banks of the River Thames. The river water flows eastward, carrying human waste and raw sewage directly out to the North Sea. The dense urban population creates a localized economy based on public entertainment and ticketed spectacles. Carpenters nail wooden planks together to build large, open-air theaters and elevated fighting rings along the city streets. Promoters begin charging silver and copper coins for public entry into these enclosed spaces. The timeline advances forward to the year 1719 CE. The location shifts to a specific neighborhood near the Tottenham Court Road in the City of London. A British fighter named James Figg stands on a raised wooden stage inside a newly constructed amphitheater. Figg prepares to combine the exact parrying techniques of metal sword fencing with the blunt force of fist fighting, establishing himself directly in front of a paying audience as the premier bare-knuckle champion of England. The year is 1719 CE in the City of London. The specific location is a street called Tottenham Court Road in the western section of the city. Horse-drawn wooden carriages roll across the packed dirt and cobblestone street. The solid iron wheel rims crush loose stones and horse manure under their mechanical weight. A British fighter named James Figg walks onto a raised wooden stage inside a newly constructed amphitheater. Carpenters built this circular amphitheater using thick oak beams and rough-cut pine boards. The structural stage elevates the fighters exactly 4 feet above the ground floor. This elevation provides a clear line of sight for the standing audience. Figg charges his audience exactly 2 shillings and 6pence for entry through the heavy wooden doors of the venue. The sixpence coin consists of silver weighing exactly 2.8 grams. Hundreds of paying spectators pack into the enclosed space. The human bodies release body heat and carbon dioxide into the trapped air. The air smells of damp wool garments and burning tallow candles. James Figg stands exactly 6 feet tall on the wooden planks. His physical body weighs exactly 185 pounds. Figg possesses broad clavicle bones and thick latissimus dorsi muscles developed through years of swinging heavy steel swords. Figg operates a school of arms. He teaches paying students the precise mechanical movements of the broadsword, the wooden quarterstaff, and the bare fists. He combines the specific footwork of metal sword fencing with the blunt mechanical force of fist fighting. Fencers maintain a wide stance. A fencer keeps the lead foot pointed straight forward and the rear foot placed at a 90-degree angle. Figg adopts this exact fencing stance on the wooden stage. The wide placement of his feet lowers his center of gravity. This low center of gravity provides a highly stable base to generate kinetic energy. Figg holds his left arm extended straight out toward his opponent to gauge the exact physical distance between their bodies. He keeps his right hand pulled back directly next to his chin to prepare a strike. Another fighter, named Ned Sutton, steps onto the opposite side of the wooden stage. Ned Sutton works as a pipe maker in the town of Gravesend. Sutton molds wet river clay into hollow smoking pipes and fires them in brick kilns reaching temperatures of 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Sutton possesses dense muscle mass from this continuous physical labor. He accepts the challenge to fight Figg for a cash prize consisting of gold coins. The two men step to the center of the oak boards. The soles of their leather shoes scrape against the wood grain. Sutton lunges forward. He throws a heavy bare fist toward the facial structure of James Figg. Figg utilizes a defensive technique called parrying. Figg uses his left forearm to strike the outside of Sutton's incoming wrist. The physical impact redirects the kinetic energy of Sutton's punch away from Figg's skull. The redirected arm pulls Sutton's torso forward. This sudden movement exposes his left rib cage. Figg immediately rotates his pelvic bone. He drives his right fist directly into the exposed ribs of Sutton. The bare carpal bones of Figg strike the intercostal muscles of Sutton with severe mechanical force. The impact compresses the rib bones inward. The compression expels the oxygen stored in Sutton's lungs out through his open mouth. The audience shouts loudly. Their vocal cords generate acoustic sound waves bouncing off the wooden walls of the amphitheater. Sutton stumbles backward on the rough pine boards. He expands his diaphragm to draw atmospheric oxygen back into his pulmonary alveoli. The bare-knuckle combat continues in a single, unbroken sequence. The fighters strike each other continuously until one man completely loses the physical ability to stand upright. Figg repeats his parrying technique. He continually redirects incoming strikes and drives blunt force trauma into the soft tissues of his opponent. Figg eventually strikes Sutton's mandible bone with sufficient force to rotate the skull. The sudden rotation disrupts the nerve signals traveling down the brainstem. Sutton completely loses voluntary motor control and collapses heavily onto the wooden stage. James Figg defeats Ned Sutton in 3 separate, documented matches across a span of several years. These 3 victories establish Figg as the recognized bare-knuckle boxing champion of England. Figg prints physical business cards on mechanical paper presses. The printing presses use lead type coated in oil-based black ink to transfer the text directly onto the paper cards. The text advertises his status as the master of the noble science of defense. Wealthy aristocrats read these printed cards and pay Fig gold guinea coins for private instruction in hand-to-hand combat. A gold guinea coin weighs exactly 8.3 grams and contains 91% pure elemental gold. The aristocrats arrive at the amphitheater wearing silk coats and powdered wigs. The fine silk fabric originates from the cocoons of the Bombyx mori moth, imported directly from China via merchant sailing vessels. Fig teaches these wealthy men the mechanical sequence of stepping, parrying, and striking using their bare hands. The continuous striking of bone against bone frequently fractures the delicate metacarpal bones of the aristocratic students. The sharp bone fragments puncture the skin and bleed warm red blood directly onto the wooden floorboards of the training room. James Fig dies in 1734 CE. He leaves his amphitheater and his combat methods entirely to his trained students. One of his specific students is a heavy British fighter named Jack Broughton. Jack Broughton possesses a weight of 196 pounds. He relies heavily on calculated footwork and defensive posturing. The timeline advances forward to the year 1743 CE. The location shifts to a packed amphitheater on Oxford Road in the City of London. Jack Broughton sits at a wooden desk to draft a new code of rules, designing a physical method to protect his wealthy students from severe skeletal fractures. The year is 1743 CE in the City of London. The specific location is an amphitheater built on Oxford Road. Builders constructed this amphitheater using thick timber boards to enclose a raised fighting stage. Hundreds of human bodies occupy the wooden benches inside the venue. The bodies radiate thermal heat and release carbon dioxide into the enclosed air. The air smells heavily of spilled ale and burning tobacco leaves. A bare-knuckle fighter named Jack Broughton sits at a wooden table inside this building. Broughton weighs exactly 196 pounds. He holds a quill pen cut from the primary flight feather of a goose. He dips the tip of the keratin quill into a glass inkwell filled with iron gall ink. The ink consists of iron salts mixed with tannic acids extracted from oak trees. Broughton presses the wet ink onto a flat sheet of woven paper to draft a formal code of rules for physical combat. The woven paper consists of pulped cotton rags pressed flat under a heavy wooden screw press. The paper absorbs the wet iron gall ink, permanently staining the cellulose fibers. The written words dictate specific mechanical boundaries for fighting. Broughton specifies a regulation regarding a fallen human body. The rule states a fighter must remain standing on his feet to receive a legal strike from an opponent. Broughton writes a second regulation measuring time. A fighter collapsing onto the wooden floorboards receives exactly 30 seconds of rest. The human body uses this 30-second interval to clear lactic acid from the muscle tissue and pump oxygenated blood back to the brain. A designated official stands near the wooden stage holding a brass pocket watch. The pocket watch contains a coiled steel mainspring that turns interconnected brass gears. The gears rotate a metal hand across a numbered dial to measure the exact passage of the 30 seconds. Two designated men, called seconds, step onto the stage to physically lift the fallen fighter. The seconds carry the fighter to a painted chalk square, located exactly in the center of the wooden stage. The fighter must stand unassisted on this chalk line when the brass hand completes its 30-second cycle. This specific recovery period provides the central nervous system the exact time required to regain partial motor control. The measured pause allows the brain tissue to survive the blunt force trauma applied by consecutive strikes. Broughton also designs a new piece of physical equipment to equip his wealthy aristocratic students during their training sessions. Broughton cuts pieces of soft sheepskin leather. He sews the leather pieces together using a steel needle and heavy linen thread to form a hollow covering for the human hand. He stuffs the interior cavity of the leather with coarse hair cut directly from the manes and tails of horses. Horsehair consists primarily of a protein called keratin. Keratin provides a rigid yet flexible physical structure. Broughton names these stuffed leather gloves mufflers. A student slides his bare hand into the leather muffler and secures it tightly around his wrist with a linen string. The student strikes the facial structure of his training partner. The keratin fibers inside the leather bend and rub against each other under the mechanical pressure. The friction between the individual hairs converts a portion of the mechanical kinetic energy into a small amount of thermal heat. The horsehair padding compresses between the metacarpal bones of the fist and the solid jawbone of the target. This physical compression absorbs roughly 30% of the kinetic energy transferred during the strike. The absorbed kinetic energy preserves the structural integrity of the delicate carpal bones inside the hand of the student. The leather barrier maintains an unbroken epidermal layer on the human face. The wealthy students retain intact skin and unbroken hands to conduct their daily administrative businesses in the city. Fighters inside the amphitheatre on Oxford Road use these written rules and padded gloves to regulate the physical destruction of the human body. The promoters charge the spectators silver shillings to watch men fight under strict time limits and measured pauses. The paper document written by Jack Broughton governs the sport of boxing across the British Empire for the next 95 years. The timeline advances forward to the year 1838 CE. The location shifts outward to a wet, grassy field located beyond the municipal city limits of London. Heavy rain falls onto the soil of the grassy field. The water saturates the dirt, turning the ground into a thick layer of mud. A group of wealthy British patrons drives thick wooden posts directly into this muddy turf. The workers measure the distance between the posts to outline a square enclosure spanning exactly 24 feet on each side. The men pull thick hemp ropes through iron rings attached to the wooden posts, creating a strict physical barrier to contain the combatants for a new era of fighting. The year is 1838 CE. In a grassy field located just outside the municipal borders of London. A heavy rain falls continuously from the low clouds, dropping liquid water directly onto the dirt. The water saturates the topsoil, mixing with the loose earth to create a thick layer of wet mud. A group of wealthy British patrons stands in this wet field to establish a new set of regulations called the London Prize Ring Rules. These specific rules govern the physical mechanics of professional bare-knuckle combat across the country. Carpenters construct a strict physical boundary directly on the muddy grass to contain the fighters. The carpenters select dense oak wood to create 4 heavy corner posts. They cut the oak logs to a length of exactly 6 feet. The workers drive the wooden logs exactly 2 feet deep into the wet topsoil using heavy iron mallets. This physical placement leaves exactly 4 feet of solid wood standing directly above the muddy grass. The workers use an iron auger to drill 2 separate holes through the center of each oak post. The carpenters measure the distance between the 4 installed posts to outline a perfect square. Each side of this square measures exactly 24 feet in length. The workers thread 2 thick ropes, woven from hemp plant fibers, through the drilled holes. The upper rope sits exactly 4 feet above the muddy ground, aligning directly with the lower rib cage of an average adult male. The lower rope sits exactly 2 feet above the ground, aligning with the human knee joint. The hemp fibers possess a high tensile strength, capable of supporting thousands of pounds of moving weight. The thick ropes absorb the kinetic energy of a falling human body, keeping the fighters strictly inside the 24-foot square. 2 bare-knuckle fighters step into this enclosed square. The wet mud reduces the natural physical friction between the human foot and the ground. Cobblers hammer iron nails through the thick leather soles of the fighting shoes to solve this problem. The nails secure 3 solid iron spikes to the bottom of each leather shoe. The iron spikes measure exactly 1 inch in length. The fighter presses his physical body weight down into his legs, driving the iron spikes directly through the viscous mud and into the dense root system of the grass beneath. The iron spikes lock the foot into a stationary position on the earth. The stationary foot provides mechanical traction. The fighter uses this traction to rotate his pelvic bone and transfer kinetic energy upward through his spinal column. The energy travels down his arm and directly into his bare knuckles to deliver a forceful strike. The London prize ring rules establish a distinct method for measuring the progression of the combat. The physical fall of a human body directly dictates the end of a round. A round continues uninterrupted until one fighter physically drops onto the muddy grass. A fighter drops to the ground from a blunt force strike, to the skull, or from a sudden loss of footing in the wet mud. The exact moment the torso or the knee of a fighter touches the wet earth, the specific round immediately ends. The fallen fighter receives exactly 30 seconds of rest. Designated assistants carry the fallen man to his specific corner of the square. An official timekeeper watches the brass hand of a pocket watch complete a 30-second mechanical cycle. The official calls the men back to a straight scratch line, carved directly into the mud in the exact center of the ring. Both fighters place their spiked toes exactly on this carved line to begin the next round. This specific rule structure leads to extremely long periods of physical combat. A single match frequently stretches to 80 distinct rounds. The fighters strike the hard frontal and parietal bones of their opponent using entirely bare hands. A fighter lands 50 consecutive strikes against a solid human cranium over the course of an hour. The continuous mechanical impact crushes the microscopic capillaries running beneath the epidermis of the hand. Red blood and clear lymphatic fluid leak out of the ruptured vessels. The fluid pools inside the limited space between the skin and the metacarpal bones. The physical accumulation of this fluid causes the human hand to swell rapidly. The hands expand to a diameter of roughly 4 inches, taking on the physical volume of small grapefruits. The swollen tissue pulls the skin tight, restricting the flexibility of the phalange joints. The fighter loses the mechanical ability to close his fingers into a tight, compact fist. The human heart pumps oxygenated blood at a rate of roughly 20 liters per minute during this extreme physical exertion. The continuous cellular respiration generates massive amounts of internal thermal heat. The eccrine glands in the skin excrete a liquid mixture of water and sodium chloride to cool the body. The liquid sweat mixes directly with the wet mud and red blood covering the skin of the fighters. The 80 rounds stretch the total duration of the match past 3 consecutive hours. The lactic acid accumulates heavily in the deltoid muscles, causing severe chemical fatigue in the shoulders. The fighters rely on their spiked shoes to push their exhausted bodies forward, wrapping their forearms around sweaty necks to grapple and intentionally fall into the cold mud to secure another 30 seconds of rest. The crowd of wealthy patrons stands outside the hemp ropes to watch the physical endurance of the fighters. The ambient air temperature rests at exactly 50 degrees Fahrenheit. The men wear coats, woven from sheep wool. The wool fibers retain their natural lanolin oil, acting as a hydrophobic barrier that causes the liquid rainwater to bead up and roll off the surface. The spectators wager gold sovereign coins on the outcome of the match. The gold sovereign coin weighs exactly 7.9 grams and contains 22-carat gold. The men exchange these heavy coins as the fighters continue to bleed onto the packed mud. The London prize ring rules govern these bare-knuckle fights for 29 consecutive years. The timeline advances forward to the year 1867 CE. The location shifts directly into the urban centre of London, moving inside a dry brick building called the Amateur Athletic Club. A Welsh sportsman named John Graham Chambers sits inside this building holding a pen. Chambers drafts a completely new code of rules sponsored by the Marquis of Queensberry. Chambers writes specific regulations mandating the use of padded leather gloves for all official matches. He also writes a rule standardizing the passage of time, requiring fighters to compete within strictly regulated rounds lasting exactly 3 minutes. The room sits inside the Amateur Athletic Club in the City of London. The walls consist of fired red clay bricks, mortared with a mixture of lime and sand. The ambient air temperature inside the room measures exactly 60 degrees Fahrenheit. A Welsh sportsman named John Graham Chambers sits at a solid oak desk. Chambers holds a dip pen equipped with a forged steel nib. He dips the steel nib into a glass bottle filled with black carbon ink. The ink contains fine soot particles suspended in a solution of water and gum arabic. Chambers presses the steel tip directly against a sheet of pressed linen paper. He records 12 specific rules governing the physical parameters of combat. John Douglas, the 9th Marquess of Queensberry, provides the financial backing to print and distribute these rules to sporting clubs. Douglas pays the commercial printing presses using British sterling pound notes. The printed text physically alters the mechanics of human fighting. Chambers writes a specific regulation requiring all competitors to wear fair-sized boxing gloves. Manufacturers construct these gloves using tanned sheepskin leather. Leather workers cut the sheepskin into specific patterns using steel shears. The workers sew the pieces together using heavy linen thread coated in natural beeswax. The beeswax lubricates the thread, allowing it to pull tightly through the punctured leather without snapping. The workers stuff the interior cavities of the gloves with exactly 8 ounces of curled horsehair. The 8 ounces of horsehair provide a physical barrier measuring roughly 2 inches in thickness over the human knuckles. The workers attach long cotton laces to the cuffs of the gloves. Trainers pull these laces tight to compress the radiocarpal joints of the fighters, locking the wrist bones into a straight, rigid line with the forearm. This 2-inch horsehair barrier fundamentally changes the physical transfer of kinetic energy. The horsehair compresses upon physical impact with a solid human skull. The physical compression absorbs roughly 30% of the kinetic energy. This absorption reduces the immediate mechanical stress applied to the 27 bones of the human hand. A bare knuckle fractures under roughly 400 pounds of force. The padded glove distributes the force over a striking surface area of exactly 16 square inches. The distributed force protects the fragile metacarpal bones from fracturing against the dense frontal bones of the opponent. Fighters wearing these padded gloves generate massive kinetic energy without breaking their hands. They strike the head of an opponent using maximum physical force. The heavy padded glove accelerates toward the head at a speed of roughly 25 miles per hour. The glove strikes the mandible bone, pushing the human skull rapidly backward. The sudden mechanical movement stretches the axon fibers located in the brainstem. The stretched fibers disrupt the electrical signals traveling down the spinal cord to the leg muscles. The disruption causes the leg muscles to lose tension, dropping the opponent directly to the wooden floorboards. Chambers writes a specific numerical rule governing this physical fall. A fighter striking the floorboards triggers an exact 10-second count. A designated referee stands directly over the fallen man. The referee vocalizes the numbers 1 through 10, spacing each spoken word exactly 1 second apart. The fallen fighter must use his latissimus dorsi and quadriceps muscles to lift his body weight entirely off the floorboards before the referee vocalizes the 10th second. The 10-second interval provides the human brain a precise window to restore the interrupted electrical signals. The referee terminates the match immediately if the fighter remains on the floor. Chambers also explicitly forbids any physical grappling, wrestling, or throwing maneuvers, forcing the men to rely entirely on striking. Chambers introduces a strict mechanical boundary for time. The previous bare-knuckle rules allowed a round to continue until a fighter fell to the ground. Chambers mandates a continuous 3-minute duration for every round. An official timekeeper sits at the edge of the ring holding a brass stopwatch. The internal steel mainspring of the watch unwinds, moving a small brass hand across a circular dial to measure exactly 180 seconds. This 3-minute structure requires a distinct biological management of cellular energy. The human body utilizes adenosine triphosphate molecules to fuel muscle contractions. A fighter, throwing continuous heavy punches, depletes his available adenosine triphosphate within roughly 30 seconds. The heart rate accelerates to 160 beats per minute to pump fresh oxygenated blood to the exhausted muscle tissues. Lactic acid accumulates in the deltoid and triceps muscles, causing the muscle fibers to contract at a much slower rate. The fighter utilizes lateral footwork to step backward and avoid incoming strikes, actively managing his oxygen intake while the brass stopwatch continues to tick. The timekeeper halts the physical combat at the exact end of the 3 minutes. The fighters receive a mandatory rest period lasting exactly 60 seconds. The fighters sit down on wooden stools placed in the opposite corners of the square ring. The human lungs expand and contract rapidly, pulling atmospheric oxygen through the trachea and into the pulmonary alveoli. The heart rate drops from 160 beats per minute down to 110 beats per minute. Trainers use wet cotton sponges to squeeze cold water directly over the heads and shoulders of the fighters. The cold water extracts thermal heat from the skin through physical evaporation, lowering the core body temperature. The 60-second rest ends. The timekeeper strikes a brass bell with a solid metal hammer. The physical collision generates an acoustic sound wave, traveling through the air at 767 miles per hour. The sound wave hits the tympanic membranes of the fighters, signaling the immediate start of the next 3-minute cycle. The Amateur Athletic Club publishes these regulations in the year 1867. British and American sporting clubs adopt the printed text to regulate their ticketed events. The transition from bare-knuckle fighting to gloved combat takes precisely 25 years to reach the heavyweight championship level. The timeline moves forward to the year 1892. The location shifts across the Atlantic Ocean to the city of New Orleans, Louisiana. Workers install hanging electric arc lights inside the Olympic Club arena, illuminating a canvas ring for 2 heavyweight fighters named John L. Sullivan and James J. Corbett. The year is 1892 CE, inside the Olympic Club Arena in the city of New Orleans, Louisiana. New Orleans rests directly on the banks of the Mississippi River, situated exactly 1 foot above sea level. The exact date is September 7th, 1892. The ambient humidity in the coastal city reaches 85%. Workers inside the Olympic Club suspend heavy electric arc lights directly above a square wooden boxing ring. The arc lights pass high-voltage electrical current through 2 solid carbon electrodes separated by a small gap of atmospheric air. The electrical current vaporizes the carbon, producing an intensely bright white light, emitting physical heat and ultraviolet radiation. The light falls directly onto a flat ring floor, covered in heavy cotton canvas. The canvas consists of thick cotton threads, woven tightly together to create a durable, slip-resistant surface for the athletes. A heavyweight fighter named John L. Sullivan steps onto this white canvas. Sullivan stands exactly 5 feet and 10 inches tall. His physical body weighs exactly 212 pounds. Sullivan carries a thick layer of subcutaneous fat over his abdominal muscles and heavy skeletal muscle on his shoulders. He enters the ring having built his fighting career entirely during the bare-knuckle era. His combat mechanics rely on planting his flat leather shoes firmly into the wooden floorboards and throwing wide, heavy strikes with his arms. A second heavyweight fighter, named James J. Corbett, walks into the opposite corner of the ring. Corbett stands 6 feet and 1 inch tall, weighing exactly 178 pounds. His physical structure contains less subcutaneous fat and relies entirely on lean muscle fiber. Corbett utilizes modern biomechanics for physical movement. He keeps his weight balanced perfectly on the metatarsal bones of his feet. This specific stance allows the gastrocnemius muscles in his calves to contract rapidly, pushing his body backward and forward across the ring. Both men wear leather boxing gloves stuffed with curled horsehair, strictly following the printed Queensberry rules. The official gloves weigh exactly 5 ounces each. The promoters of the Olympic Club guarantee a total financial purse for this specific contest equaling $25,000 American dollars. The fighters also agree to an additional side bet consisting of $10,000. The physical stacks of printed paper currency sit secured inside a local steel bank vault. The winner of the fight claims the entire sum of $35,000. An official timekeeper strikes a brass bell with a metal hammer. Sullivan walks directly toward the center of the canvas. He plants his feet on the floorboards and throws a heavy right hand toward the face of Corbett. The human eye of Corbett processes the mechanical movement of Sullivan. Corbett pushes off the canvas with his left foot, moving his torso laterally to the right. Sullivan's padded 5-ounce glove travels entirely through the empty atmospheric air. The missed punch forces Sullivan to expend stored cellular energy without transferring any mechanical force to a solid target. Corbett steps forward and strikes Sullivan in the face with quick, straight punches before stepping laterally away from the counterattacks. This precise mechanical sequence repeats continuously for 20 separate 3-minute rounds. The electric arc lights generate extreme thermal heat, raising the ambient temperature directly under the lamps to roughly 90 degrees Fahrenheit. The eccrine glands of both men excrete liquid sweat. The liquid drips onto the cotton canvas, creating dark, wet patches on the woven fabric. The fighters consume exactly 60 minutes of active combat time and 20 minutes of sitting on wooden stools during the regulated resting periods. Sullivan expends massive amounts of adenosine triphosphate, pushing his 212 pounds forward. Lactic acid pools densely in his deltoid muscles. His heavy arms drop below his chin, exposing his mandible bone directly to his opponent. The accumulation of carbon dioxide in his bloodstream causes his lungs to heave heavily. The timekeeper strikes the brass bell to begin the 21st round. Corbett steps forward on his toes. He pivots his left foot inward, rotating his pelvic bone and transferring his body weight entirely to his right leg. The kinetic energy travels up his spinal column and through his left shoulder. Corbett contracts his left bicep to bend his elbow at a 90-degree angle. He drives his horsehair-padded left glove directly into the right side of Sullivan's jaw. The horsehair compresses against the skin of Sullivan's face. The physical force pushes the mandible bone sharply to the left. The sudden mechanical torque twists the cranium, disrupting the electrical signals inside the brainstem. Sullivan loses all voluntary motor control in his leg muscles. His heavy body collapses forward, landing entirely flat onto the wet cotton canvas. The referee stands directly over the fallen body of Sullivan. The referee begins vocalizing the mandatory 10-second count, pausing exactly 1 second between each spoken number. The electrical signals inside Sullivan's brain fail to reconnect with his motor neurons within the specific 10-second window. The referee vocalizes the number 10 and permanently halts the match. James J. Corbett officially becomes the first heavyweight champion of the world, crowned strictly under the padded glove Queensberry rules. The promoters unlock the steel vault and hand Corbett the $35,000 American dollars. The physical introduction of timed rounds and padded gloves transforms the fighting matches into calculated athletic contests. Promoters begin organizing massive bouts inside large steel and brick stadiums to maximize ticket sales. The sport expands outward from the USA to other continents. The timeline advances exactly 16 years forward. The exact date shifts to December 26, 1908. The location moves thousands of miles across the Pacific Ocean to an outdoor stadium in Rushcutters Bay. Rushcutters Bay sits directly on the coastline of Sydney, Australia. A black American heavyweight fighter named Jack Johnson steps into a wooden ring built under the open southern hemisphere sun, preparing to systematically dismantle a Canadian champion and break a racial boundary maintained by the global sporting elite for half a century. The exact date is December 26, 1908. The location is an outdoor stadium constructed in Rushcutters Bay. Rushcutters Bay sits on the eastern coastline of Sydney, Australia. The stadium consists of thick pine boards nailed directly over a framework of heavy steel scaffolding. 20,000 human spectators sit on these wooden boards. The ambient air temperature reaches exactly 82 degrees Fahrenheit, under the direct radiation of the southern hemisphere sun. This specific date aligns with a public holiday recognized across the British Empire as Boxing Day. An Australian sports promoter named Hugh D. McIntosh funded the construction of the stadium. McIntosh paid exact sums of paper currency to secure the physical participation of 2 heavyweight fighters. He handed exactly $30,000 American dollars to a Canadian fighter named Tommy Burns. The money consisted of printed paper banknotes stored securely inside a leather satchel. McIntosh paid exactly $5,000 American dollars to a black American fighter named Jack Johnson. The payment to Burns constituted the largest financial purse given to a single athlete for a sporting event up to that specific year. Tommy Burns holds the official title of heavyweight champion of the world. Burns stands exactly 5 feet and 7 inches tall. His physical body weighs exactly 168 pounds. Jack Johnson walks out from the wooden dressing room and steps onto the square canvas ring. Johnson stands exactly 6 feet and 1 inch tall, and his physical body weighs exactly 192 pounds. Johnson carries heavy skeletal muscle across his pectoral and deltoid regions, built by manually lifting heavy wooden shipping crates on the commercial docks of Galveston, Texas. A timekeeper strikes a brass bell, and the two fighters move toward the center of the ring. Burns pushes off the canvas, using his calf muscles, stepping directly forward to close the physical distance between their bodies. He throws a padded right punch, aimed directly at the chin of Johnson. Johnson extends his left arm and opens his leather glove. He catches the incoming padded fist of Burns directly in the palm of his own glove. The horsehair inside the glove compresses, and Johnson absorbs the kinetic energy of the strike using the triceps muscle of his left arm. Johnson uses his superior physical weight to lean directly onto the shoulders of Burns. The 192 pounds of mass compress the spinal column of the shorter man. Burns expends massive amounts of cellular energy in his quadriceps simply to remain standing upright under the external weight. Johnson speaks directly into the ear of Burns, vocalizing specific words mocking the physical strength of the Canadian champion. The acoustic sound waves travel directly from the vocal cords of Johnson into the tympanic membrane of Burns. Johnson retracts his facial muscles to expose his teeth to the 20,000 spectators. He strikes Burns with a short right uppercut. The leather glove impacts the mandible bone, cutting the epidermal tissue on the lower lip of Burns. Red oxygenated blood flows from the severed capillaries and drips downward onto the white cotton canvas. The match continues for 13 consecutive 3-minute rounds. The sun continues to radiate ultraviolet light onto the exposed skin of the fighters. Johnson systematically blocks the incoming strikes by keeping his forearms rigidly vertical in front of his face. He counters with precise left hooks. The kinetic force of these hooks creates deep contusions around both eyes of Burns. The soft tissue surrounding the eye sockets swells with clear lymphatic fluid, physically narrowing the visual field of the champion. Burns breathes heavily through an open mouth, and his lungs pull in the humid salt air, blowing off the nearby ocean water. The timekeeper rings the brass bell to start the 14th round. Johnson lands a rapid sequence of right and left strikes directly to the cranial vault of Burns. The padded horsehair gloves strike the temporal and parietal bones in rapid succession. The sudden rotational acceleration of the skull disrupts the endolymph fluid inside the semicircular canals of the inner ear. The inner ear regulates human spatial balance. His legs lose mechanical stability, and his body weight drops downward onto the white canvas. The referee begins vocalizing the mandatory 10-second count, where Burns uses his arms to push his body weight back up from the floorboards before the final number. Johnson steps forward to deliver another heavy strike. The superintendent of the local Sydney police force stands directly outside the hemp ropes. He wears a heavy wool uniform tailored with brass buttons. The superintendent blows a small metal whistle, creating a high-frequency acoustic wave that travels over the cheering crowd. Dozens of uniformed police officers step directly onto the wooden ring apron. They climb through the hemp ropes and physically place their hands on the shoulders of the referee. The police officers issue a verbal command to stop the physical combat immediately to prevent further anatomical destruction to Burns. The referee waves his arms, signaling the official termination of the match. Jack Johnson officially secures the title of heavyweight champion of the world. The physical victory breaks a strict racial boundary enforced by white American and European promoters for exactly 50 years. Camera operators standing at ringside capture the exact physical movements of the fight onto 35mm cellulose nitrate film stock. The camera operators crank a metal handle on the side of the wooden camera box, advancing the strip of film at exactly 16 frames per second. The chemical emulsion on the celluloid surface reacts to the ultraviolet sunlight, permanently recording the changing patterns of light and shadow. The operators develop the film using silver halide crystals and ship the metal film reels on steamships back to the USA. Theater owners project these moving images onto canvas screens across multiple cities, collecting paper currency from viewers standing thousands of miles away from the physical ring. The timeline advances 13 years forward. The year shifts to 1921 CE. The location moves to a temporary wooden arena built in Jersey City, New Jersey. Construction workers nail over 2 million feet of pine lumber together to build an octagonal stadium capable of holding 90,000 sitting spectators. An American fighter named Jack Dempsey prepares to face a French fighter named Georges Carpentier, while a radio operator tests a vacuum tube transmitter to broadcast the live acoustic sounds of the fight across the eastern USA. The exact date is July 2nd, 1921. The location is a flat tract of land called Boyle's 30 acres in Jersey City, New Jersey. Carpenters swing heavy steel hammers to drive iron nails into raw pine lumber. The workers assemble a massive octagonal wooden stadium over a period of exactly 2 months. The structure consists of exactly 2,250,000 board feet of yellow pine wood. The cut pine boards smell sharply of natural tree resin and fresh sawdust. The finished wooden bowl measures exactly 300,000 square feet in total area. The carpenters build wooden bleachers rising upwards at a 30-degree angle to provide a clear line of sight directly to the center. Exactly 91,000 human spectators walk onto these wooden bleachers. They sit shoulder to shoulder, transferring their internal body heat into the ambient summer air. The air temperature reaches exactly 90 degrees Fahrenheit under the direct radiation of the afternoon sun. An American boxing promoter named Tex Rickard stands near the wooden entrance gates. He collects paper currency and silver coins from the entering crowd. The spectators hand over physical tickets printed on stiff cardboard using black oil ink. The total collected money equals exactly $1,789,000 American dollars. The paper banknotes sit stacked inside steel lockboxes guarded by armed police officers. The steel boxes lock securely with heavy brass padlocks. This specific accumulation of currency generates the first $1 million ticket revenue in the recorded history of professional fighting. The sheer financial volume transitions the physical combat from a localized sporting event into a massive industrial enterprise driven by organized ticket sales and corporate media broadcasting. A radio operator named Andrew White sits directly beside the square canvas ring. White wears a metal headset containing 2 circular speakers placed directly over his ears. He speaks into a heavy carbon microphone. The microphone contains tiny granules of raw carbon packed tightly between 2 thin metal plates. The acoustic sound waves from his vocal cords strike the front metal plate, compressing the carbon granules and altering their electrical resistance. A copper wire carries this rapidly fluctuating electrical current to a vacuum tube transmitter located in the neighboring city of Hoboken. The glass vacuum tubes heat a tungsten filament to boil off electrons, amplifying the electrical signal. The transmitter pushes the amplified signal up a tall steel antenna. The antenna radiates invisible electromagnetic radio waves outward at the exact speed of light. Operators in theaters and public halls across the eastern USA receive these radio waves using copper coil receivers. Thousands of people sit in wooden chairs inside these distant halls, listening to the acoustic reproduction of the fight emitted from large vibrating paper cones in real time. An American heavyweight champion named Jack Dempsey steps through the hemp ropes onto the canvas ring. Dempsey stands exactly 6 feet and 1 inch tall. His physical body weighs exactly 188 pounds. He applies solid white petroleum jelly directly to his cheekbones and the bridge of his nose. The petroleum jelly creates a slick, hydrophobic barrier on the epidermal layer, reducing the physical friction of incoming leather gloves. A French fighter named Georges Carpentier steps into the opposite corner. Carpentier weighs exactly 172 pounds. Carpentier served in the French military aviation branch during the First World War, piloting wooden biplanes covered in doped canvas. Both fighters wear leather gloves weighing exactly 5 ounces. The gloves consist of tanned sheepskin stitched together with heavy linen thread. Carpentier steps forward on his metatarsal bones to face Dempsey in the center of the ring. The referee strikes the brass bell with a metal hammer. Dempsey steps forward using a continuous bobbing motion. He bends his knees and flexes his lumbar spine, lowering his cranial vault by exactly 4 inches. He shifts his physical body weight continuously from his left foot to his right foot. This constant vertical and lateral movement changes the spatial coordinates of his head, forcing Carpentier to constantly recalculate his targeting vectors. The average human brain requires exactly 250 milliseconds to process visual stimuli and trigger a motor response in the arms. Dempsey exploits this specific biological delay. He changes his physical position faster than the neural pathways of his opponent can transmit the required electrical signals. Carpentier throws straight right punches through the empty air where the head of Dempsey rested just milliseconds before. The fight progresses into the 4th consecutive 3-minute round. The eccrine glands of both men secrete liquid sweat, coating their torsos in a wet layer of salt water. The horsehair padding inside the leather gloves absorbs this liquid, increasing the physical weight of the gloves by several ounces. Dempsey steps forward and plants his left foot firmly onto the canvas. He rotates his pelvic bone counterclockwise, generating kinetic energy in his core abdominal muscles. He contracts the deltoid muscle in his right shoulder, driving his right fist forward. The wet leather glove strikes the left side of Carpentier's jawbone. The mechanical impact travels directly through the solid mandible and into the temporal bone. Carpentier stumbles backward. Dempsey immediately pushes off the canvas and delivers a second heavy strike directly to the right side of Carpentier's face. The physical force halts the backward momentum of Carpentier. The sudden deceleration shakes the soft brain tissue inside his rigid skull. Carpentier loses total mechanical control of his leg muscles. His knees fold, and his body drops straight down onto the wooden floorboards beneath the canvas. He rests on his right side, pressing his face directly against the wet cotton fabric. The referee stands over the fallen body and vocalizes the numbers 1 through 10. Carpentier remains completely motionless on the floorboards as the 10th second passes. Jack Dempsey retains the heavyweight championship. Andrew White speaks the final result into the carbon microphone, and the electromagnetic waves carry the information instantly to the distant theaters. The timeline advances exactly 53 years forward. The year shifts to 1974. CE. The geographical location moves across the Atlantic Ocean to the city of Kinshasa in the nation of Zaire. Workers pour liquid concrete to construct the massive Stade du 20 Mai stadium. Muhammad Ali steps onto the ring apron to face the undefeated heavyweight champion George Foreman under the extreme heat and humidity of the African sun. The exact date is October 30th, 1974. The location is the Stade du 20 Mai in the city of Kinshasa. Kinshasa sits on the southern bank of the Congo River in the nation of Zaire. Workers poured liquid concrete over interlocking steel rebar grids to construct the tiered seating of this open-air stadium. Exactly 60,000 human spectators sit on these solid concrete benches. The local time reads exactly 4 o'clock in the morning. Organizers scheduled this pre-dawn start time to broadcast the live television feed directly to closed-circuit theater screens during the prime evening hours in the USA. The ambient air temperature in Kinshasa rests at exactly 86 degrees Fahrenheit. The relative humidity measures roughly 90%. The heavy moisture content of the air carries the smell of wet soil and the sweat of the dense crowd. A heavyweight challenger, named Muhammad Ali, steps onto the cotton canvas ring. Ali stands exactly 6 feet and 3 inches tall, weighing exactly 216 pounds. A heavyweight champion named George Foreman steps into the opposite corner. Foreman weighs exactly 220 pounds and possesses a 2-inch reach advantage over Ali. The organizers position large xenon arc lamps directly above the ring to provide the extreme illumination required by the color television cameras. The xenon gas inside the lamps reaches a state of plasma, producing intense optical light and high levels of thermal radiation. The thermal radiation raises the air temperature directly inside the ring to roughly 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The boxing ring features 4 strands of thick hemp rope enclosed in red vinyl casings. The intense heat and high humidity cause the hemp fibers to expand and stretch. The stretching loosens the physical tension of the ropes, leaving them slack between the steel corner posts. The timekeeper rings the brass bell. Ali moves backward and presses his spine directly against the loose ring ropes. The slack hemp fibers bend backward over the edge of the wooden ring apron. This specific physical angle allows Ali to lean his upper torso backward, pulling his skull entirely out of the standard punching range. Ali raises his leather gloves and presses his forearms directly against his own cheekbones. Foreman steps forward and throws swinging blows called hooks. A hook requires a fighter to bend the elbow and swing the heavy arm in a horizontal arc. Foreman aims these padded hooks directly at the latissimus dorsi and external oblique muscles of Ali. Foreman contracts his deltoid and pectoral muscles to generate maximum kinetic energy. The leather gloves strike the radius and ulnar bones of Ali. The dense calcium structure of the forearm bones absorbs the mechanical force. Ali uses the elastic tension of the hemp ropes to absorb the remaining physical momentum of the strikes. The physical act of throwing continuous heavy punches requires high volumes of atmospheric oxygen. Foreman expands his diaphragm heavily to pull air into his lungs. The human body regulates internal temperature by excreting liquid sweat through the eccrine glands. The 90% atmospheric humidity saturates the surrounding air with water vapor. The high moisture content of the air limits physical evaporation. The liquid sweat pools heavily on the skin of the fighters and drips downward onto the woven cotton canvas. Foreman retains his internal body heat, raising his core temperature. The elevated core temperature forces his cardiovascular system to pump higher volumes of blood to the surface capillaries in his skin. This biological process diverts oxygenated blood away from his contracting skeletal muscles. Foreman expends massive amounts of adenosine triphosphate over the course of 7 3-minute rounds. The chemical depletion causes severe fatigue in his arms, and his punching velocity slows down by the start of the 8th round. The 8th round begins. Ali remains pressed against the ropes. Foreman steps forward, holding his tired arms down near his waist. Ali observes the lowered arms. Ali pushes off the sagging hemp ropes with the metatarsal bones of his feet. He rapidly extends his left arm, striking the face of Foreman with a left jab. Ali instantly rotates his pelvic bone and extends his right arm. He strikes the jaw of Foreman with a straight right cross. The leather glove compresses against the mandible bone. The mechanical torque twists the cranium of Foreman. Foreman loses his physical equilibrium. He spins laterally and falls flat onto his back on the canvas. The referee stands over the body and vocalizes the mandatory 10-second count. Foreman remains on the floorboards as the 10th second passes. Muhammad Ali regains the heavyweight championship. Camera operators point heavy television cameras at the canvas. The glass lenses focus the reflected light onto internal photoconductive tubes. The tubes convert the optical image into an electrical video signal. A coaxial cable carries this signal to a microwave transmitter located directly outside the stadium. The transmitter beams the signal up to the Intelsat 4 communications satellite, orbiting exactly 22,236 miles above the equator. The satellite amplifies the signal and transmits it down to ground stations in North America and Europe. Roughly 1 billion people watch the electronic picture of the physical knockout. Medical doctors observe the continuous transfer of kinetic energy to the human brain during these long professional matches. The timeline advances exactly 9 years forward to the year 1983 CE. The location shifts to an executive office building in Mexico City. Officials from the World Boxing Council sit at a wooden conference table, drafting a mandate to require a newly designed leather glove to stop a specific pattern of physical injuries to the human eye. The year is 1983 CE in the city of Mexico City. Mexico City sits at an elevation of exactly 7,350 feet above sea level. The high physical altitude reduces the atmospheric pressure to roughly 11 pounds per square inch. The lower air pressure decreases the density of oxygen molecules in the ambient air. Officials from a regulatory organization called the World Boxing Council sit inside an office building constructed from reinforced concrete and plate glass. The silica glass windows measure exactly half an inch in thickness, physically blocking the acoustic noise of the street traffic below. The officials sit at a large conference table, constructed from solid mahogany wood. The mahogany wood originates from the Swietenia macrophylla tree, featuring a dense, interlocking grain structure holding a dark reddish-brown color. The officials use a mechanical steel typewriter to press oil-based ink onto a flat sheet of white cellulose paper. The steel keys strike an ink-soaked ribbon, permanently transferring the black pigment directly onto the paper fibers. The ink forms the letters of a new safety mandate regulating the physical construction of boxing gloves. Prior to this printed mandate, fighters wore gloves featuring a detached leather thumb casing. The detached leather thumb measured exactly 3 inches in length. The detached design allowed the fighter to extend the thumb bone outward at a perpendicular angle to the main fist during combat. A missed punch frequently caused the extended leather thumb to strike the human eye of an opponent. The human eye measures exactly 24 millimeters in diameter. The front of the eye features a transparent layer of tissue called the cornea. The stiff leather thumb scrapes directly across the cornea, physically removing the outer epithelial cells. The kinetic force of the glove pushes the eyeball rapidly backward into the orbital cavity. The orbital cavity consists of 7 converging facial bones. The sudden physical pressure inside the vitreous humor tears the thin retina away from the back wall of the eye. The retina contains millions of light-sensitive photoreceptor cells. The physical detachment severs the blood supply to these cells, causing permanent structural blindness. The World Boxing Council mandate completely bans the use of the detached thumb in professional matches. Glove manufacturers alter their physical sewing patterns to comply with the printed document. Workers cut a precise strip of cowhide leather measuring exactly 2 inches wide. The workers use a steel needle to stitch this leather bridge directly between the thumb compartment and the main knuckle compartment of the glove. The heavy nylon thread holds a tensile strength of exactly 15 pounds. This physical connection locks the thumb strictly parallel to the metacarpal bones. The binding completely prevents the thumb from extending outward, stopping the leather tip from physically entering the human eye socket. The glove manufacturers simultaneously introduce a new internal material to replace the traditional curled horsehair. Workers inject liquid polyurethane foam directly into the glove casings. Workers mix liquid polyether polyol with diisocyanate inside a heated steel vat. The chemical mixture creates a hot exothermic reaction, reaching a physical temperature of roughly 160 degrees Fahrenheit. The reaction releases carbon dioxide gas. The gas forms millions of microscopic closed cells within the liquid material. The liquid expands to fill a hollow aluminum mold, shaped exactly like a curved human fist. The foam cools and cures into a solid, flexible block over a period of exactly 24 hours. The printed mandate requires fighters weighing above 147 pounds to wear gloves weighing exactly 10 ounces. The cured foam block weighs exactly 6 ounces, and the cowhide leather casing and nylon laces provide the remaining 4 ounces. A professional fighter swings this 10-ounce glove at a physical speed of exactly 25 miles per hour. The polyurethane foam strikes the human skull. The microscopic gas cells compress under the physical pressure, flattening directly against the bone. The physical compression absorbs exactly 30% of the total kinetic energy. The foam then rebounds to its original thickness in precisely 50 milliseconds. This specific energy absorption protects the 27 fragile bones inside the human hand. The protected hand allows a professional fighter to throw heavy strikes continuously over a 12-round match. A championship match lasts exactly 36 minutes of active combat. A single fighter frequently absorbs over 100 padded strikes to the head during this specific time period. The human brain weighs roughly 3 pounds. The brain consists of 86 billion neurons suspended in a physical matrix of glial cells. The brain floats entirely free inside the rigid cranial vault. Exactly 150 milliliters of cerebrospinal fluid surrounds the brain tissue. The 10-ounce glove strikes the solid mandible bone. The mechanical force pushes the skull rapidly backward. The skull accelerates quickly, while the brain mass remains momentarily stationary in the fluid due to physical inertia. The rough interior surface of the frontal bone crashes directly into the frontal lobe of the brain. The skull reaches the end of the neck's range of motion and stops abruptly. The brain continues moving backward through the cerebrospinal fluid and strikes the occipital bone at the rear of the skull. Medical doctors record this specific mechanical sequence as a coup contre coup physical injury. The continuous padded impacts stretch the long axon fibers connecting the brain cells. The physical stretching damages the microtubules inside the axons. The damaged microtubules release a specialized protein called tau. The tau proteins fold incorrectly and clump together to form solid neurofibrillary tangles. The protein tangles block the transport of nutrients through the living cell. The neurons die, and the total brain tissue physically shrinks in volume over several years. This cellular death causes a permanent physical condition called chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Humans continue to alter the physical parameters of combat using standardized equipment and medical observation. The timeline advances exactly 29 years forward. The year shifts to 2012 CE. The geographical location moves across the Atlantic Ocean to the city of London, England. Construction workers assemble a square canvas ring inside the XLL Exhibition Centre. A British flyweight fighter named Nicola Adams walks toward the canvas wearing bright blue 10-ounce gloves and a padded headgear made of polyurethane foam, stepping onto the ring apron to compete in the very first official Olympic women's boxing tournament in the recorded history of the sport. The exact year is 2012 CE. The geographical location is the XL Exhibition Centre in the city of London, England. Construction workers built this exhibition centre on a 100-acre site located on the northern quay of the Royal Victoria Dock. The building features a heavy steel frame supporting a flat metal roof. Large steel trusses span the entire width of the hall, transferring the mechanical weight of the metal roof directly into concrete foundation pillars driven deep into the dense London clay. The steel structure encloses an indoor exhibition space measuring exactly 1 million square feet. The air handlers on the metal roof push refrigerated air down through aluminum ducts, maintaining a stable indoor air temperature of exactly 68 degrees Fahrenheit. The moving air carries the faint smell of woven canvas and synthetic rubber directly over 4,000 human spectators. These spectators sit in rows of molded plastic seats surrounding a raised steel boxing platform. A British flyweight fighter named Nicola Adams walks directly toward this raised steel platform. Adams stands exactly 5 feet and 5 inches tall. Her physical body weighs exactly 112 pounds. She climbs the metal stairs and steps through the vinyl-covered ropes to compete in the very first official women's boxing tournament in the recorded history of the Olympic Games. The International Olympic Committee added this specific women's bracket to the official program, marking an exact 108-year delay since the organization first introduced the men's tournament in the year 1904. Adams wears protective equipment constructed specifically for amateur Olympic combat. She wears bright blue leather gloves, weighing exactly 10 ounces. The gloves contain injected polyurethane foam to absorb the kinetic energy of physical strikes. She also wears a blue protective headgear. The headgear consists of thick synthetic foam covered in cowhide leather. A leather strap buckles securely under her mandible bone, holding the padded foam directly over her temporal and parietal cranial bones. A Chinese fighter named Ren Kanchan stands in the opposite corner of the square ring. Kanchan wears the exact same protective equipment, dyed in a bright red color. Kanchan holds the official title of world champion in the 51-kilogram flyweight division. The referee stands between the two women holding a plastic whistle. The referee blows atmospheric air through the whistle, vibrating a small cork pea inside the plastic chamber to produce a sharp acoustic tone. The sound wave travels at roughly 767 miles per hour, reaching the tympanic membranes of the athletes. The two fighters move to the center of the cotton canvas. Adams steps forward on the metatarsal bones of her feet. She utilizes her soleus and gastrocnemius calf muscles to bounce continuously on the balls of her feet. This rapid muscular contraction keeps her physical center of gravity highly mobile. She extends her left arm to throw a straight jab. The blue leather glove strikes the red polyurethane headgear, covering the face of Can-Can. The mechanical force of the punch transfers directly through the synthetic foam and into the solid frontal bone of Can-Can. The adult human brain floats inside the rigid skull, surrounded by exactly 150 milliliters of cerebrospinal fluid. The physical impact pushes the skull rapidly backward, causing the brain tissue to shift slightly through this clear liquid. The cerebrospinal fluid slows the physical deceleration of the brain mass. This fluid displacement lowers the mechanical pressure placed directly on the 86 billion fragile neurons. The fighters compete over 4 separate rounds. Each round lasts exactly 2 minutes. An official timekeeper presses a plastic button on an electronic digital clock to track the exact passage of the 120 seconds. The short duration requires a high rate of continuous physical exertion. Adams throws a rapid sequence of left and right strikes. She extends her triceps muscles to propel the 10-ounce gloves forward. The kinetic chain originates in the balls of her feet, travels up through the femur bones, and transfers rotational torque through the spinal vertebrae. Her heart rate accelerates to 170 beats per minute. Her lungs draw in the chilled 68-degree air of the enclosed arena to supply oxygen directly to her contracting deltoid muscles. 5 human judges sit directly at ringside holding electronic scoring devices. The judges press colored plastic buttons on their devices to record each successful physical strike, connecting with a target area. The central computer program requires at least 3 of the 5 judges to press the corresponding button within a 1-second physical window to officially record a single point. This electronic synchronization registers the exact number of clean punches landing on the head and torso. During the second round, Adams drops her center of gravity by bending her knees. She drives her right glove directly into the chin of Can-Can. The kinetic energy travels upward through the jawbone, dropping Can-Can down to the canvas floorboards. The referee stops the digital clock and points to the fallen fighter to register a mandatory standing count. Can-Can rises back to her feet, and the physical combat resumes for the remaining 2 rounds. The digital clock counts down to 0. The timekeeper sounds an electronic buzzer. The acoustic frequency of the buzzer signals the complete end of the final 2-minute round. The central computer tallies the running total and displays the final numbers on a digital screen. Nicola Adams registers exactly 16 points. Ren Can-Can registers exactly 7 points. The referee holds the right wrist of Adams and raises her padded blue glove directly into the air. Olympic officials drape a solid metal disc around the neck of Adams using a purple woven ribbon. The Royal Mint in South Wales struck the metal discs using heavy hydraulic presses. The press applied 900 tons of mechanical pressure to stamp the official Olympic emblem onto the silver core. The gold medal weighs exactly 412 grams. The metal consists of exactly 92.5% pure silver, covered by exactly 6 grams of pure elemental gold. The physical weight of the heavy metal presses directly against her clavicle bone. The bright gold reflects the photons emitted from the overhead metal halide lamps. Human beings continue to engage in this physical exchange of kinetic energy. The activity spans exactly 5,000 years of documented physical evidence. The exact tools evolved from raw Sumerian animal hides tied with leather straps, to heavy Roman iron spikes, to horsehair padding, and finally to injected polyurethane foam. Fighters moved their physical bodies from the wet mud of rural British fields to the dry silica sand of Roman amphitheatres, and eventually onto the cotton canvas of illuminated arenas. The physical structure of the rules shifted from continuous physical exhaustion to strict mechanical time intervals governed by electronic digital clocks. Humans continue to structure, measure, and monetize the ancient physical act of settling disputes using two closed hands.